This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. We continue in the Orchos Chaim of the Rosh. We're up to Ois Chav Daled. The Orchos Chaim of the Rosh, Rabbi Asher Kadishi, Rabbeinu Asher Kadishi. And the Holy Rosh says, how are you, Rabbi Yossi? The Rosh says, V'yisrachik min haschoik, one should distance himself from laughter, umin hakas, and from anger. Ki mevalbel ruchai, because it disturbs your spirit. V'daitoi shaladam, and the mindset of a person. And the question here is, why is the Rosh saying one should be careful from laughter and anger? But we know the Rosh already said in Ois Daled, you should distance yourself from late sanus, and in Ois Vav, you should distance yourself from kas. Says Rav Goldberg, what the Rosh is saying, what he's adding, is this Nakuda, that yes, beforehand he was saying it's prohibited, but now he's saying a logical reason to avoid it. Namely, it confounds a person. It's mavalbel, the ruach and the das of a person. And that's even more basic than asr. Asr and mutter, that's all good. But more important than asr and mutter is the seichel. And al pi seichel, this is logical, that one has to be careful not to disturb the defining element of a human being. Furthermore, not only is it logical, but it disturbs the most important part of a person, namely one's das. And one has to preserve their das. And therefore, aside from the fact that kas is asr, but it's reasonable, it's logical to avoid kas. And therefore, Rav Goldberg points out, this would be a problem even for a Gentile, even for a goy, to avoid schoik and kas. He quotes very powerfully from Rabbi Yerucham Levavitz. Chazal say, Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah. Says Rabbi Yerucham, Chazal Darshan on the pasuk, Lishmar es haderech, the derech refers to Derech Eretz, which says Rabbi Yerucham implies that Derech Eretz is biblical. And even if you're going to say the drasha is only an asmachta, nevertheless, Kadma LaTorah means it's more important than the Torah. More. So for example, person goes to shul for a Marev, or for Shachris. So, whether he davens or not, that might be biblical to daven something a day, but to talk by the davening, to disturb the sanctity of Hashem's home, that would be even worse than not davening, because that's al pi seichel, that's logic dictates how can a person converse in the house of the Ribbon Shalom. So there's certain things that are more basic even than Isser and Mutter. A Rav is speaking, so people learn in their Gemara. What a chutzpah to learn while a rabbi is speaking. First of all, learning is Doiraisa, but Derech Eretz is even more important than the Doiraisa. One thing's for sure, God is not interested in that learning, and another thing is for sure, it would be much more preferable had the person not learned. If he didn't learn, that would only be Bittul Torah. But to stick a head into a Sefer while someone else is speaking, it's a lack of Derech Eretz. That's much more basic, much more important, much more fundamental than what is mutter and what is asr. Now interesting, the Rosh says, V'sheyavoid tamid liyotzroi bi'ahava. You should serve God always with happiness, with love. You should serve God always with love. Well, that's a non sequitur. What does the fact that you should distance yourself from a levity and anger have to do with serving God with love? Rav Goldberg explains that if a person serves God out of fear, they're still likely, or it's still possible to stumble in levity or kas. But someone who is in a situation of avas Hashem, he will not be swayed, not by schoik and not by kas. And someone whose heart is always involved in avas Hashem, he'll always be besimcha. So it's just interesting to point out, what's the contrast? Distance yourself from levity. Distance yourself from anger. It confuses the seichel. Serve God always with love. It seems like if one who serves God with love, they're not liable to be nichshal in the area, in the inyan of schoik and kas. Then the Rosh says, "V'shelo yaniach davar la'asos me'inyan zois hatakana." Do not leave over anything from this formula, from this takana, from this legislation. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, in his Perush on the Orchos Chaim of the Rosh, he says the language here is a bit discombobulated. Serve God with love and don't leave over anything from this legislation, as if it's referring to the whole Sefer. Like, why would the Rosh randomly be saying in Ois Chav Daled, by the way, make sure you keep everything in this book? What's that got to do with anything? And therefore Reb Chaim Kanievsky says that what he means to say is that all your actions should be out of love for God. Don't do a small thing or a great thing, only emanating from the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, Rav Goldberg points out that the Achronim do not seem to read the Rosh this way, because if you look in the Tosfos Yom Tif wrote a Targum in Yiddish on the Orchos Chaim of the Rosh, and the Tosfos Yom Tif in his Targum, he reads these words, translated into Hebrew, V'yizar ma'od shelo yaniach shum davar sheniskar be'ilu ha'hanhagos. Don't forsake any of the above-mentioned practices. Indeed, according to the Tosfos Yom Tov, what the Rosh is saying is, be careful to observe all the practices mentioned in the Sefer. Why would the Rosh, specifically in Ois Chav Daled, emphasize the importance of observing all the practices in the Sefer? So Rav Goldberg explains that there may be many practices in the Sefer that are not easy to perform, or they seem like chumrais or midas chasidus, and regarding them, the Rosh says that you need to serve God out of love, and memela, if you serve God out of love, you won't have a hard time observing all of these practices. Meaning, in life, there are certain things a person has to do that are difficult, but if you love what you need to do, or the person you need to do it for, it makes it much easier and more possible. And therefore, what the Rosh is saying is, in the context of serving God out of love, it will be possible not to violate any of these practices. Perhaps then, distancing from levity or anger are from the hardest practices to observe. It's very hard to overcome anger, or to be watchful, not to succumb to leitzanos. But the Rosh is saying somebody who lives with love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it makes it within the realm of reasonable possibility. So, according to the Tosfos Yom Tov, the Rosh here, specifically in the context of love of Hashem, is encouraging us to be faithful to all the practices mentioned in the Sefer, and that will be bolstered by Avas Hashem, which, by the way, the Rosh continues to speak about in the next Ois Chafei, which is Le'oiv es Hashem b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'oidecha, which Rav Miller would say that it's possible to teach love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu even to a child. Even though the Chovos HaLevavos says that the love of Hashem is the highest of all the madrigos, from here we see there are many levels of Avas Hashem, and to some baseline level, one could teach even to a child. Okay, thanks everyone for joining. We will pick it up next week on Monday. Tonight, 8:30, we have an amazing shir called Double Lech Lecha. If anybody's interested in the new Sefer on Bereshis, it's available on our website, rabbidg.com. Just go there and you'll see you could order it with free shipping. Not free shipping to the UK, but I hope to be in the UK, Be'ezus Hashem Parshas Toldos. And until then, bracha v'atzlacha, have a great day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.